Welcome to Boring History for Relaxing channel. Tonight we step into a remote 18th century cabin where the snow lies deep against the walls, the pine trees stand like silent guards, and the only friendly thing for miles is a nervous little fire trying its best. You feel the cold before you understand it. It presses through wool, bites through leather, and reminds you that, realistically, you probably won't survive this without becoming extremely polite to the fireplace. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell us where you're watching from, along with your local time, because somewhere out there, another tired person is also pretending that a blanket counts as central heating. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward through snow that has no interest in your comfort. It folds over your shoes, grips your ankles, and muffles the forest until even your own breathing seems borrowed from someone quieter. The path is not really a path, not in the cheerful modern sense with signs, gravel, and perhaps a little map posted by people with funding. It is more like a memory pressed into the land by hooves, sled runners, tired boots, and repeated hope. You're somewhere in the 18th century, far from a town, far from a market, and very far from any person who might say, "No worries, I'll just order another blanket." In many parts of colonial North America and rural Europe, cabins and small timber dwellings stand at the edge of settlement, forest, pasture, and uncertainty. A mainstream fact settles around you with a cold. Many frontier cabins are built from logs laid horizontally, their gaps packed with clay, moss, straw, mud, or whatever local material can be bullied into blocking the wind. The work is practical, blunt, and usually done with hand tools. Nobody is standing nearby with a clipboard calling it rustic charm. Rustic charm is what later generations say after the roof stops leaking. The trees lean close. Snow sits on their branches in soft white shelves. Every so often one branch releases its burden, and a powdery slump falls with a muted thump. You pause, listening. The silence does not feel empty. It feels occupied by things that are simply not speaking. Somewhere under the crusted drifts, roots sleep. Somewhere above you, a bird makes a thin complaining sound and then apparently thinks better of continuing. Even the wildlife understands that this is not a night for dramatic announcements. Ahead, at last, a small shape appears between the trunks. The cabin is low, dark, and almost shy. Its roof slopes under snow. Its chimney gives off a faint thread of smoke, thin as a grey ribbon. The sight reaches you before warmth does, and you feel your shoulders loosen in a way that is almost embarrassing. It is only a cabin, 4 walls, a roof, a door, a hearth. Yet in this weather it has the emotional power of a palace, though admittedly a palace with mice, soot, and a mattress that may contain several historical opinions. You come nearer and notice how the building seems to crouch against the wind. The logs are uneven, because trees have the rude habit of being trees rather than factory-cut materials. The corners are notched together, each timber locked into the next with a kind of rough patience. The walls hold the marks of an axe, not decorative marks. Work marks, repeated swings, blisters, breath steaming in the air. Someone has shaped this shelter because winter does not accept excuses. Historians still argue whether the popular image of the lonely frontier cabin tells us more about actual settlement life or about later romantic stories people wanted to believe. The truth, as usual, refuses to sit neatly. Some cabins really are isolated, set apart by miles of woods, snow, ridge, swamp, or rough track. Others belong to loose clusters of kin and neighbours, close enough for borrowed tools and distant enough that a casual visit still requires determination, daylight, and knees that have not entirely resigned. The myth of total solitude can exaggerate things, but the hardship is not imaginary. Cold is an excellent editor of nonsense. You reach the door. It is made of planks, heavy enough to resist wind, animals, and possibly your own optimism. An iron latch rests against the wood. Iron is precious here, not in the sense of jewels and ceremony, but in the sense that every hinge, hook, nail, pot, and blade represents labour, money, trade, transport, and somebody's decision that this object matters more than something else. You lift the latch, and it gives with a small clack that sounds shockingly loud. The first breath inside is not exactly fresh. It is smoke, wool, old wood, ashes, damp leather, dried herbs, cold air, and human living pressed into a single low room. Yet beneath it all is warmth, real warmth, not the even invisible sort that modern walls politely provide, but lopsided, glowing, negotiated warmth. It lives near the hearth and fades with every step away from it. The fire paints the interior in orange pulses. Shadows climb the rafters and retreat. Your eyes adjust slowly, as though they too must remove snowy boots. The floor is rough. Sometimes cabins like this have packed earth floors. Sometimes puncheon floors made from split logs flattened with patient chopping. Here, the boards are uneven beneath you. They creak softly, not like a haunted house, but like a house that has carried people, sacks, tools, and winter thoughts for years and would appreciate less criticism. A bench stands near the hearth. A table waits against the wall. Pegs hold cloaks, tools, and a small bundle of something drying. The bed, if it deserves such a confident word, is tucked in the warmer part of the room, away from the worst draught. Privacy is not so much absent as never invited. You close the door quickly, because the cabin reacts to open air like a person hearing bad news. The room seems to gather itself again. The fire snaps. A log shifts and sends up a scatter of sparks. There is a smell of resin, sharp and sweet. You move closer, holding your hands out, and the skin across your knuckles begins to sting as it warms. That sting is oddly pleasant, a tiny punishment for returning to life. A quirky little tidbit waits in the corner of domestic history. In some cabins, people use bed curtains, hanging blankets, or enclosed sleeping spaces not for elegance, but to trap body heat through the night. The grand four-poster bed and the rough frontier blanket fought are distant cousins, both admitting that human beings are basically warm soup in need of wrapping. If you've ever built a blanket nest on a cold evening, congratulations. You are participating in a very old technological tradition, just with fewer fleas and better snacks. You sit near the hearth and begin to understand the scale of this place. The cabin is not merely a building, it is a machine for staying alive. Every object earns its place. The kettle hangs where heat can reach it. Firewood waits nearby, sorted not by aesthetic preference but by burn time, dryness, and how urgently someone wants not to freeze. A broom leans beside the wall. A chest holds clothing, maybe food, maybe documents, maybe the family's most treasured objects, or possibly all three, because storage furniture here has to multitask like a parent during tax season. Outside, the forest presses close, but inside the world narrows to flame, timber, breath, and the small sounds of shelter. Snow taps faintly against the shutter. Wind finds one gap, then another, and tests them with a thin whistle. The chinking holds in most places. In others, cold threads through and brushes your cheek. You notice that warmth is not a condition here. It is a project. You do not simply have warmth. You make it, guard it, feed it, and arrange your body around it. The 18th century is not one simple place, of course. A cabin in Pennsylvania differs from one in the Scottish Highlands, from one in rural Scandinavia, from one in a wooded edge of New France. Materials vary, customs vary, laws, languages, foods, and fears vary. But the bodily truth of winter shelter remains familiar. You step in from the cold, you seek the hearth, you measure safety by how long the woodpile lasts. You learn the personality of drafts. You become very interested in whether the roof is making that noise because of wind or because it has developed ambitions. The firelight moves over the walls, touching axe scars, hanging cloth, a wooden bowl, the dark mouth of the chimney. Soot gathers above the hearth in old layers. It marks seasons of cooking, warming, drying, boiling, smoking, and sitting quietly when there's nothing useful left to say. The hearth is the centre, but not in a poetic way first. It is the stove, heater, lamp, workplace, gathering place, and occasional smoke delivery system. It demands attention. It gives comfort. It also reminds you that the line between cosy and dangerous is sometimes only a poorly placed spark. You lean back, slowly now. Your breathing settles. The cold remains outside, patient but blocked. The cabin is small, smoky, imperfect, and stern. It does not flatter you. It does not promise ease, but it holds. For tonight, that is no small thing. You listen to the fire consume the wood one soft crack at a time, and the forest beyond the walls becomes less like a threat and more like a vast sleeping creature. You are not warm everywhere. Your back is cool, your boots are damp, and one draught has clearly chosen you personally. Still, your hands glow, your face loosens. The snow road has ended at shelter, and shelter, in this century, is never boring to the body that needs it. The cabin breathes around you in slow, smoky sighs. It doesn't breathe like a living creature. Not exactly, though after enough time in the half-dark, with firelight moving across the logs, you could be forgiven for thinking the place has opinions. The hearth exhales, the walls creak, the roof settles under its white load. A draught slips beneath the door and curls along the floor like a cat that refuses to be owned by anyone. You stand in the glow and let your eyes travel over the room. Nothing here is accidental. The logs stacked into walls are not smooth. Polite cylinders. They are scarred, flattened, darkened, and fitted together by human hands that understand winter as a deadline. In many 18th century cabins, builders use local timber because local timber is what exists, and hauling finished lumber over bad roads is the kind of idea that sounds lovely only to people who are not hauling it. Oak, pine, chestnut, spruce, fir, or whatever the region provides becomes wall, beam, peg, stool, shelf, and sometimes very stubborn firewood. The spaces between the logs are packed with chinking. You can see it if you lean close, though leaning close to a wall in a smoky cabin is not the glamorous historical experience travel brochures tend to promote. Clay, mud, straw, moss, animal hair, lime, small stones, or wooden slivers fill the gaps, depending on region and supply. The goal is simple. Keep wind outside, keep heat inside, and do not spend the whole night wondering why nature has so many entrances. A mainstream historical fact rests in that rough seamwork. Chinking and daubing are essential to log construction, because without them, a cabin is less a house than a tidy stack of breezy trees. You touch one patched line with your fingertips. It is dry near the heat, colder near the corner, and crumbly where age has begun negotiating with gravity. The wall is not a sealed barrier in the modern sense. It is an argument with weather, and the weather is very committed. Cold air finds cracks. Smoke finds rafters. Moisture finds everything eventually. Still, the cabin holds together with the honest stubbornness of things made because they must be made. The chimney draws your attention next. It is not merely a hole for smoke to escape, although on a bad day it may behave like a hole for smoke to reconsider. In some early cabins, chimneys are built of stone if stone is nearby, or of clay-lined sticks, timber, and mud if stone is scarce. The wooden versions are sometimes called cat and clay chimneys in parts of North America, and yes, the name sounds like a children's story written by someone who has inhaled too much soot. These chimneys can work surprisingly well, but they also bring risks. A clay lining cracks, sparks rise. Dry wood remembers that it is wood. Suddenly your heating system becomes very enthusiastic in the wrong direction. The fire is low but steady. It sits behind andirons. The iron supports that hold logs so air can move beneath them. Iron tools rest nearby. Tongs, a poker, perhaps a shovel for ash. Each tool has a plain authority. You do not use your fingers. That is not bravery. That is how you become a cautionary tale told in a very bored tone. A crane or trammel may swing over the flames, holding a pot at different heights, higher for gentle warming, lower for serious boiling. Cooking is geometry, patience, and a little smoke in the eye. Smoke climbs upward, but not all of it behaves. Some rises into the chimney. Some drifts out and lingers under the rafters, staining beams black over the years. You smell it in cloth, hair, bedding, and food. It becomes part of the cabin's atmosphere, like memory you can cough. Yet smoke is not only an annoyance. It helps preserve meat hung near the hearth. It discourages some insects. It marks the room as inhabited. Comfort, in this place, arrives with side effects. Modern people like their warmth invisible, quiet, and not attached to respiratory drama. The 18th century, sadly, has not read your wellness blog. You crouch near the hearth and study the stones at its base. The hearthstones are darkened by ash and time, their edges worn from boots and tools. Here, meals are cooked, wet stockings are dried, children are warmed, stories are told, and small repairs are performed in whatever light the flame can provide. In colder regions, the hearth dominates the room not because anyone is being decorative, but because heat must be concentrated where people gather. The cabin has no central hallway, no spare room full of forgotten holiday decorations, no mysterious drawer containing 11 dead batteries. Space is too valuable for that level of modern nonsense. Historians still argue whether the open hearth should be seen mainly as a symbol of domestic comfort, or as a demanding labour centre that shaped nearly every hour of household life. Both views have weight. The hearth gives light, warmth, and emotional focus. It also requires wood, tending, cleaning, cooking skill, constant caution, and the willingness to smell faintly like yesterday's smoke. It is cosy in the same way a cow is charming. Absolutely, but only after someone has done the work. The roof above is made with heavy rafters and covered according to local habit and resources. Wooden shingles, bark, thatch, turf, or boards may be used in different regions. You look upward and notice the underside of the structure, the angled bones of the shelter. Snow presses down from outside, and the roof answers with small settling sounds. Roof pitch matters. Too flat, and snow piles dangerously. Too steep, and construction grows harder. Nobody here is designing for a magazine spread titled Winter Minimalism. They are designing for the deeply practical question, will this collapse on my sleeping body? A very important aesthetic category. Honestly, the windows are few and small. Glass is costly and fragile in many rural settings, so some cabins use oiled paper, shutters, small panes, or openings covered in ways that trade light for warmth. You move toward one window and see frost clouding the edge. The outside world appears in fragments, dark trees, pale snow, a slice of sky. The window is less a view than a compromise. Every opening invites cold. Every closed shutter steals light. The cabin makes you choose, and it does not care about your mood. A quirky tidbit hides in the way people manage interior brightness. In some places, reflective objects, pale washed walls, or carefully placed work near the doorway help stretch limited daylight. Even a white cloth or a scrubbed board can make a dim room less cave-like. This is not interior designer's leisure. This is the ancient art of asking one weak sunbeam to do the work of 6 lamps. Somewhere, a candle waits to be used, but candles cost labour or money. Daylight is free, which makes it suspiciously popular. You notice the doorframe next. It is lower than expected, and you instinctively dip your head. Many old structures are compact not because people are all tiny, which is a favourite lazy explanation, but because smaller spaces are easier to heat and cheaper to build. People vary in height, as they always have. But fuel is the real architect. Less air inside means less air to warm. Less wall area means fewer drafts. A snug cabin is not merely quaint. It is thermal strategy wearing a rough wooden coat. The smell of the room grows more layered the longer you stand still. Ash has a dry mineral scent. Green wood, if burned too soon, gives a damp sourness and spits with irritation. Properly seasoned wood burns cleaner and hotter, though clean is a generous word in a room where the ceiling slowly turns the colour of old tea. Dried herbs hang from a peg, releasing faint notes when warmed. Wool near the hearth gives off its own animal softness. Leather stiffens and relaxes depending on its distance from flame. Everything absorbs everything else in a single-room cabin. Privacy is not just social, it is aromatic. There is nowhere for a smell to go except into history. You shift a stool nearer the fire, careful not to block the path between door, hearth, bed, and table. Movement inside a small cabin follows invisible rules. You learn where not to place a bucket. You learn which floorboard tilts. You learn how far a spark can jump. You learn that smoke prefers the exact height of your face, because smoke, like a bored cat, enjoys attention. The cabin trains you through repetition. Bend here, step there, hang wet things there, but not too close, unless you want your sock to become a tiny tragic flag of poor judgment. The walls continue to glow in patches. Firelight makes the logs seem warmer than they are. You can see old repairs where chinking has been renewed, a peg replaced, a board wedged into a gap. The cabin is not finished once built. It is maintained, watched, patched, and forgiven. Weather tests it daily. Smoke stains it hourly. People alter it as needs change. A shelf appears. A peg is added. A crack is sealed. A draught is cursed with admirable consistency. Outside, frost deepens its grip. Inside, the cabin does what it can. It catches heat, loses heat, catches it again. It filters wind through small failures and contains fire through careful habits. You sit in the flickering dimness and understand that shelter here is not separation from nature. It is negotiation with nature under a roof. The forest remains close. The cold remains clever. The smoke reminds your eyes that comfort has texture. Yet the room steadies you. Each log, stone, peg, and patch belongs to the same quiet purpose, to make a small pocket of survivable air while winter leans its full weight against the walls. The dark before dawn is the coldest kind of dark, the sort that feels as if it has been stored underground and brought out especially for your inconvenience. You wake beneath heavy covers, not because you feel rested, but because your nose has become a tiny, offended weather instrument. The air above your face is sharp. The blanket holds a pocket of warmth around your body, and leaving it feels like an unnecessary political decision. Still, the fire needs attention. In an 18th century cabin, the morning does not begin with a cheerful button, a glowing screen, or a kettle clicking itself awake like a civilized little servant. It begins with embers. If the household has done well, the night fire has not died completely. A bed of coals waits under grey ash, dull and hidden, like a secret being kept by the hearth. This is one of the great small skills of winter living, banking the fire before sleep so that it lasts until morning. A mainstream historical fact settles in the dimness. Before common matches became widely available in the 19th century, keeping live embers or borrowing fire from a neighbour could be far easier than starting a flame from nothing. You slip from the bed and immediately regret having a body. The floorboards hold the cold with impressive dedication. Your feet find yesterday's stockings, stiff at the toes and only partly dry. You pull them on anyway, because pride is less useful than fabric. The cabin is nearly black except for the faintest red glow inside the hearth. You crouch close, moving slowly, because ash has a talent for floating directly into your breathing plans. The hearth looks dead at first. Grey powder covers everything. A charred log lies collapsed near the back. You take the iron poker and gently stir. The ash shifts. A red point brightens. Then another. There they are, the survivors. Small, patient, and frankly doing better than you. You lean nearer and feel a thin warmth brush your face. It is not enough to celebrate, but enough to hope, and in winter, hope is often measured in glowing crumbs. You gather tinder from a dry place near the hearth, fine splinters, curled shavings, tow, dry moss, or bits of bark might serve, depending on what has been saved. Nothing useful is wasted. A scrap too small for building may become kindling. A twig too crooked for anything dignified may help save the morning. You place the tinder where the coals can breathe. Then you add slivers of wood, not too many, because a smothered coal is a sulking coal. Fire has preferences, and if you ignore them, it responds by going out with theatrical quiet. You bend and blow. Your breath enters the ashen coal, slow and steady. The red grows brighter. A wisp of smoke rises, thin and blue. For a moment nothing happens, which is very much the historical experience. Then a shaving catches, a tiny flame appears, bends sideways, recovers, and begins to nibble. You feed it carefully. More shavings, a small stick, another. The flame lengthens. The room does not warm at once, of course. That would be too generous. The fire first warms itself, then the iron, then the nearest stones, then your knees, then perhaps after a while the rest of the universe. Historians still argue whether household firekeeping should be understood mainly as a technical skill, a gendered routine, or a shared necessity that changed according to region, class, and family structure. The answer shifts from place to place. In many households, women and girls spend much of their labour near the hearth, cooking, drying, warming, and managing the flame. Men and boys may cut and haul fuel. Children learn caution early, but emergencies ignore neat categories. Anyone who wakes cold enough becomes interested in combustion. The fire begins to crackle properly now. Its light moves along the walls and finds familiar things. A hanging pot, a stool, a folded cloth, a pair of boots hunched near the warmth like tired animals. You add a larger piece of wood. It catches at one edge, hissing faintly where a pocket of moisture remains. The smell shifts from old ash to living smoke, from stale night to waking day. A quirky tidbit glows among the ashes. In some places, people carry fire from one home to another in covered pans, lantern-like containers, or even carefully protected embers wrapped with insulating material. Imagine making a cold walk to ask a neighbour for fire. Not metaphorically, not poetically, but literally. Modern people borrow phone chargers. Earlier households borrow flame. The social pressure must be magnificent. You arrive at the door and say, in effect, "Good morning, we failed at keeping physics alive." You rake the coals forward and build the fire with the patience of someone who understands that rushing wastes fuel. The largest logs are not always the best first choice. Too large, and the flame struggles. Too green, and smoke fills the room until your eyes water. Dry hardwood burns long and hot, if you're lucky enough to have it. Softwood catches quickly and throws lively sparks. Useful but mischievous. Fuel is not just fuel, it is timing, species, moisture, size, and the private mood of each piece. Wood, you discover, has personality, mostly when it is annoying. The chimney begins to draw more strongly as warmth rises. Cold air still pushes at the room, but the rising column of hot smoke pulls the fire into rhythm. If the chimney is sluggish, smoke spills back, spreading low and mean before lifting. You wave it away from your face, which helps emotionally if not scientifically. Your eyes sting. Your throat tightens. The cabin smells awake now, and so do you. Unwillingly. Soon the fire is ready for work. A kettle can be hung. A pot can be nudged near the coals. Damp clothing can be moved closer, though never too close. Ashes can be shoveled aside and saved for later uses, because wood ash is not merely dirt. It can help make lye for soap, enrich certain soils when used carefully, or serve in cleaning. The hearth produces heat, light, food, waste, and materials, all in the same smoky little theatre. It is less like an appliance and more like a demanding roommate who pays rent in warmth. You sit back on your heels and hold your hands toward the blaze. The fingers ache as they warm. The stiffness leaves them gradually, one joint at a time. The fire pops, and a spark jumps against the stones. You flinch, then pretend you did not. This is important for morale, even though nobody is impressed. The flame grows taller and begins licking the underside of the hanging pot. The room edges out of darkness. Shapes return. Corners soften. The ceiling beams become visible above the smoke shadow. Morning sounds begin in layers, a shift of wood, the whisper of ash settling, the wind along the wall, a small drip from melting frost near the hearth. Far outside, perhaps a branch cracks under ice. The world is not yet bright, but it has started moving. Firekeeping makes that possible. It is the hinge between night and day, between shivering under covers and doing the 100 tasks that cold weather demands. You add one more split log, placing it across the coals with care. The flame wraps around it slowly. This is not dramatic work. No anthem rises. No one applauds the excellent angle at which you have arranged a piece of maple. Yet the cabin changes because of it. The air becomes bearable. Water can heat. Food can soften. Hands can work. Fear retreats a few feet from the bed. You remain close to the hearth, letting the warmth gather on your face while your back still feels the chill behind you. That contrast is the shape of winter indoors. Heat before you, cold behind you, smoke above you, work waiting everywhere. The fire is alive now, and like all living things in this small world, it must be fed, watched, respected, and occasionally forgiven for being difficult. You breathe slowly, the flame steadies. Dawn has not yet fully arrived, but inside the cabin, the day has already been coaxed from ash. The first meal of the day begins with a question so humble it almost disappears. What can be made from what remains? You stand near the hearth while the room gathers a little more light, and the answer waits in small containers, cloth bags, crocks, and corners where practical people hide practical things. breakfast is not a festival. It is a negotiation with storage, weather, and appetite. The frost outside has been very clear about its position. It would prefer you weak, slow, and dramatic. You, however, would prefer porridge. You take down a small sack of cornmeal, its weight familiar in your hands. In many 18th century rural households in North America, corn becomes a daily staple because it grows well in many regions, stores decently when dried, and can be ground into meal for mush, cakes, bread, and thickening. A mainstream historical fact settles into the morning. Indigenous agricultural knowledge deeply shapes colonial foodways, and corn becomes central to survival for many settlers, though often through unequal, painful, and complicated encounters. The bowl in your hands carries more history than its plain surface admits. You pour the meal slowly. It falls in a pale yellow stream, grainy and dry, with a faint sweet smell. Into the pot goes water, perhaps a little salt if there is salt enough to spare. Salt is ordinary only when supply is easy. Here it matters. It preserves meat, sharpens food, and reminds the tongue that life has not become entirely beige. You stir with a wooden spoon as the mixture heats, keeping it from clumping into stubborn little lumps that behave like they have legal rights. The pot begins to thicken, steam rises and beads on your face. The smell is simple, warm, and slightly toasted near the edges where the heat catches. This is not a breakfast photographed from above beside a linen napkin and one artful spoon. This is food that must carry you through chores, cold, and perhaps several hours of wondering why humanity left warmer places. You scrape the bottom carefully, because scorched mush is still edible, but it does introduce a flavour best described as regret. On a shelf sits a small store of dried apples, curled brown slices with the sweetness concentrated into chewy little moons. You take a few and drop them into the pot, where they soften slowly. In autumn, fruit can be sliced and dried near warmth or in moving air. One of many methods households use to stretch the harvest into winter. Apples, pears, berries, pumpkins, and other foods may be dried, stored, stewed, or tucked away in forms that look unimpressive, but carry the bright memory of sun. A dried apple is not glamorous. It is a tiny edible time capsule, which sounds poetic until it sticks in your teeth. Nearby waits salt pork, wrapped and guarded with the seriousness appropriate to fat and protein in winter. You cut a modest piece, because modest is the language of stored meat. It is dense, salty, and pale, with a smell that is both comforting and assertive. Into a small pan it goes, or perhaps onto a flat stone or spider pan near the coals. As it warms, fat begins to render. The sound is soft at first, then livelier, a quiet sputter that makes the room feel more awake. The smoke changes too, becoming richer, heavier, more promising. Historians still argue whether everyday rural diets in the 18th century should be described as monotonous or surprisingly varied, because the answer depends on season, region, wealth, trade access, and skill. On paper, cornmeal, pork, beans, roots, and dried fruit can sound painfully repetitive. In practice, a clever cook changes texture, timing, herbs, leftovers, and heat until sameness becomes something more tolerable. Still, no one should pretend that a remote winter pantry offers endless delight. There is no secret cupboard of imported oranges waiting to rescue morale, unless there is, in which case someone is probably very wealthy and not sharing properly. You stir the mush again. The apples loosen into the grain, giving off a faint tart sweetness. If there is milk, you may thin the pot with it. If there is butter, a precious scrap may melt into the surface. If there is molasses, maple sugar, or honey, breakfast turns almost festive. though you must not become too emotional. Sweetness in winter has a way of making people sentimental. One spoonful and suddenly everyone is discussing childhood, weather, and the cow's personality. A quirky tidbit belongs to the breakfast table. In some households, yesterday's cornmeal mush is cooled, sliced, and fried the next morning, turning leftovers into crisp-edge food that feels much grander than its ingredients. Humanity has always understood the magic of frying yesterday's sadness in fat. It is one of civilization's quiet achievements, right beside woven socks and pretending not to hear stomach noises during prayer. You move carefully around the hearth, because breakfast here is a choreography of heat. Pots hang from hooks or cranes, pans sit on coals, ash must be managed, sparks must be watched, too close, and food burns, too far, and nothing happens except you aging beside a lukewarm pot. There is no numbered dial. The cook reads flame colour, coal depth, smoke behaviour, and the speed at which liquid shivers. Skill lives in the wrist, eye, nose, and memory. It is not written down because the person who knows it is busy, and also possibly tired of being asked. The room fills with the sound of thick food bubbling. You lift the spoon, watch the mush fall back in slow folds, and decide it is ready enough. Ready enough is an important category. Perfection belongs to people with spare time, good lighting, and fewer drafts. You ladle the meal into a wooden bowl. The surface steams. The salt pork rests beside it, crisp at the edges where the pan treated it kindly. A few drops of rendered fat shine in the firelight. You breathe in, and for a moment the whole cabin seems less severe. The first bite warms your mouth, then your throat, then your chest. It is plain, but plain does not mean empty. The corn has body, the apple gives brightness, the salt wakes everything up like a small rude bell. The pork is intensely savoury, the kind of flavour that makes you understand why preserved meat can become the emotional centre of a day. You eat slowly at first, then faster, because hunger remembers itself. The spoon scrapes the bowl. Steam fogs the air above it. There may be rye bread, oat cakes, beans reheated from yesterday, or a scrap of cheese if supplies and region allow. There may be tea, coffee, small beer, cider, or simply hot water flavoured with whatever can be spared. In some places, tea and coffee are available but costly, tied to trade networks that stretch far beyond the lonely tree line. In others, local herbs, roasted grains, or roots provide warm drinks that imitate comfort with admirable confidence. You sip whatever is offered and choose not to complain, because the cup is hot and your fingers are grateful. Food storage shapes every bite. A cellar, if one exists, may keep roots from freezing too hard. Barrels hold flour, meal, apples, salted meat, or pickled vegetables. Crops harvested months earlier now decide the flavour of the morning. A poor harvest whispers through winter in smaller portions. A good harvest gives the household a little more courage. The pantry is a calendar you can eat, and sometimes a warning you can count. You finish the bowl and scrape it clean, wasting nothing. Even scraps have futures. Grease seasons pans, bones flavour broth, ash cleans, peels feed animals if animals can be fed. The 18th century household does not have the luxury of pretending waste disappears just because it leaves the table. Everything remains somewhere, waiting to be useful or troublesome. Modern kitchens hide abundance behind doors. Here, scarcity sits openly beside you and politely asks whether you're done with that crust. The fire settles into a steady burn. The pot is moved aside. The spoon is wiped. The bowl rinsed with as little water as practical. And breakfast becomes energy stored in your body for whatever the cold demands next. The food has not dazzled you. It has done something better. It has made standing possible, It has turned grain, fruit, salt, fat, and heat into courage of a very quiet kind. Outside, frost still grips the world with stiff white fingers, but inside, warmth now has weight in your stomach, and the day feels almost negotiable. The bucket waits by the door with the quiet menace of an object that knows exactly how much trouble it can cause. It is only wood and iron hoops, plain and useful, but in winter it becomes a test of character. You look at it. It looks back, in the way buckets do when they're about to make your fingers numb. Water is needed for cooking, drinking, washing, animals, soaking, cleaning, and a dozen small tasks that do not politely pause because the air has become rude. You lift the bucket and open the door. Cold steps in at once, bold as an unpaid guest. The world outside is pale and blue-grey, with snow lying in soft drifts over the path. The air enters your lungs so sharply that you briefly wonder whether breathing is actually necessary. It is, unfortunately. You pull your cloak tighter, tuck your hands as best you can, and step out into the frozen morning. Water in a remote 18th century household is rarely convenient. A mainstream historical fact follows you down the track. Many rural families rely on wells, springs, streams, ponds, or collected rainwater, and in freezing weather each source brings its own particular inconvenience. A well may freeze at the top or require breaking ice from the bucket. A stream may hide under a glazed crust. A spring may keep flowing if it is strong enough, which makes it suddenly the most beloved thing in the landscape. Nobody praises a spring properly until January. You move carefully, because snow has disguised every root, stone, and hollow with the false innocence of powdered sugar. This is how winter gets you. It makes everything pretty, then waits for your ankle to become overconfident. The bucket bumps against your leg. The handle creaks. Your breath comes out in white clouds that vanish quickly, as if even your own body heat is embarrassed to be seen here. The water source lies below the cabin, near a stand of leafless brush and dark pines. Perhaps it is a stream, narrow but persistent, its edges locked in ice. Perhaps it is a spring house, if the household is fortunate, a little structure built to protect a cold spring and keep milk, butter, or other perishables cool in warmer months. In many places, spring houses become valuable features because running spring water stays cooler than summer air and may resist full freezing in winter. The idea of refrigeration is not absent. It is simply made of stone, gravity, water, and wishful shivering. You reach the stream and listen. Beneath the ice there is a muffled sound, a liquid murmur moving under the hard surface. The water is there, hidden and busy, refusing to be stopped entirely. You kneel and set the bucket down. Kneeling in snow is not recommended for morale, but history rarely consults your knees. With a stick or the back of a hatchet, you break the thin ice near the bank. The first blows make dull sounds, then the crust gives with a crack, and black water appears below, shining in the dim light. You clear enough space to dip the bucket. Your hands are already stiff. Mittens help, if you have them, but wet mittens become little prisons of misery. Bare fingers grip better, but bare fingers also begin sending urgent complaints to management. You choose the least terrible option, which is a popular 18th century category. The bucket sinks. Water rushes in with a hollow gulping sound. You lift, and the weight surprises you, as it always does. Full water has no sympathy. It pulls downward with the calm confidence of something that has never cared about your plans. The handle bites into your hand. You switch grip, then switch again. A thin sheet of spilled water freezes almost at once on the outside of the bucket, making it slick and bright. Historians still argue whether household water labour has been undercounted in our understanding of daily survival, especially because it is repetitive, ordinary, and often performed by women, children, or servants. It rarely appears in dramatic stories. Nobody writes heroic ballads about going back for a second bucket because the first one was not enough. Yet without water, all the dramatic people would be thirsty, dirty, hungry, and far less impressive. You pause by the stream, listening to the hidden current. The cold makes sound seem sharper. A twig snaps somewhere in the trees. Snow slides softly from a branch. The bucket's surface trembles with tiny ripples. You notice how exposed you feel away from the cabin walls. The water source is necessary, but it is also a place where your body meets the weather directly. No roof, no hearth, no warm corner, just you, the bucket, the ice, and the cheerful possibility of slipping into water cold enough to make your soul file a complaint. A quirky tidbit belongs to winter water management. In some cold regions, people cut blocks of ice from ponds or rivers and store them in insulated ice houses packed with straw or sawdust, preserving winter cold for summer use. It sounds clever because it is clever. It also means that at some point, a group of people looked at a frozen pond and thought, "Let us harvest this inconvenience for later." Humanity is nothing if not committed to making seasonal suffering useful. You start back. The full bucket swings heavily, and you adjust your steps to keep it from sloshing. Every spill matters. Not because the stream is about to run out, but because carrying water is work, and wasting work feels like insulting yourself. The path uphill seems longer than it did coming down. It always does. Downhill with an empty bucket is almost a stroll. Uphill with water is a moral lesson in liquid form. Your shoulders tense. Your hand aches. The cold creeps through your sleeves. A line of water drips from the bucket rim and freezes along the side in clear beads. You begin counting steps without meaning to. 10 to the bent birch, 12 to the rock, 15 to the place where the snow has drifted deep. The cabin looks small from here, dark against the pale world. Smoke rises from its chimney, thin but steady, and you aim yourself toward it with the devotion of a pilgrim approaching soup. Near the door, you stamp snow from your shoes. You enter quickly and shut out the wind with a solid thud. The room receives you with smoky warmth, and the contrast almost hurts. Your fingers prickle as blood returns. The bucket lands on the floor with a wooden knock. Water slaps against its sides and settles. You have brought in something so basic that it can seem invisible, but only to people who have not carried it. Now the water must be managed. Some is poured into a kettle to heat. Some is kept aside for drinking. Some may go to animals, though animals are rarely grateful in a manner that satisfies the human ego. A little might be used for washing hands, faces, bowls, or cloth. In freezing weather, water left too near the door may form a skin of ice indoors. Water left too near ash becomes unpleasant. Water left uncovered may collect soot. The cabin teaches placement as firmly as any schoolmaster, but with fewer Latin verbs and more damp socks. You hold your hands near the hearth and flex them slowly. The fingertips burn as they warm. You resist the urge to heat them too quickly, because cold hands are foolish hands and may accept pain as comfort. Steam begins to rise from the kettle. The small sound of warming water softens the room, a faint ticking, then a whisper, then a tremble. Soon it can become drink, broth, wash water, porridge, or anything else the day requires. The bucket by the door looks ordinary again, pretending it has not just dragged you through a frozen errand. You know better. Water is not background. It is weight, distance, weather, and timing. It is ice broken before breakfast, fingers numbed at the stream, careful steps on hidden ground, and the quiet satisfaction of seeing steam lift from the kettle after the work is done. Outside, the stream keeps moving beneath its crust. Inside, the water warms, and the cabin's small circle of life continues, one heavy bucket at a time. You dress as if you were building a wall around yourself, one layer at a time. The cold is not impressed by confidence, so fabric must do the arguing. You begin with linen close to the skin, because linen can be washed more easily than heavier wool, and because the human's body, with all its sweating, shivering, and inconvenient biology, needs some sort of peace treaty with its clothing. The shirt or shift feels cool at first, then slowly accepts your warmth. In the 18th century, clothing in a remote household is not a casual afterthought. It is labour made wearable. A mainstream historical fact settles into the folds. Wool and linen are among the most important everyday textiles in much of Europe and colonial North America, with linen commonly used for underclothing and wool prized for warmth. Cotton exists, of course, and luxury fabrics travel through global trade. But in many rural places, linen and wool do the hard daily work. They do not care about elegance. They care about whether your elbows remain attached by evening. You pull on woolen stockings, thick and slightly scratchy. They sag in places and cling in others, as if they were designed by a committee of sheep with differing priorities. The toes have been darned. The heel shows another patch. The repairs do not shame the garment, they honour it. Cloth takes time to make, and wasting it would be foolish. Spinning fibre into thread, weaving thread into cloth, cutting cloth into garment, sewing seams, mending tears, and washing everything without modern convenience is enough labour to make even a simple stocking seem like a minor miracle with foot odour. You add breeches or petticoats, depending on the clothing expected in your household and region, then another layer, then perhaps an apron, waistcoat, gown, jacket, or short coat. Clothing marks gender, status, occupation, age, region, and custom. But in winter it also marks one very direct fact. You are either warm enough to function or you are not. The body becomes a bundle of practical decisions, loose enough to move, tight enough to trap heat, durable enough to survive work, replaceable only after a troubling amount of effort. The wool outer layer has a dense, animal smell when warmed. It holds smoke from the hearth and damp from the air. It scratches your wrist, it rubs at the neck, but it insulates even when slightly damp. One of the reasons wool remains beloved by people who spend too much time being menaced by weather. Linen, by contrast, is smooth and strong, but not nearly as warm. Together they make a system. Linen to protect skin and absorb sweat. Wool to guard heat. Layers to trap air. The science is simple, though nobody needs to call it science while tugging on a stubborn sleeve in the dark. Historians still argue whether homespun clothing in rural communities should be understood as a sign of poverty, independence, political identity, or just practical necessity. The answer wanders. During periods of boycott or political tension, homespun may become symbolic. In ordinary rural life, it may simply mean the household produces what it cannot easily buy. A garment can be politics, thrift, skill, and survival all at once. Clothing is sneaky that way. It looks like sleeves, then suddenly it starts discussing empire. You reach for a cap. This is not optional decoration. Heat escapes wherever it can, and an uncovered head in a cold room feels like leaving a window open in your thoughts. Men, women, and children often wear caps indoors, especially in chilly weather. A linen cap, wool cap, kerchief, hood, or knitted covering keeps warmth close. Modern people may think indoor hats look charming or quaint. The 18th century thinks modern bareheaded winter lounging is a medical mystery and possibly a cry for help. Shoes wait near the hearth, stiff from cold and damp. Leather changes with weather. It hardens, loosens, cracks, and remembers every puddle with deep resentment. You work your feet into them and fasten buckles, ties, or straps. if the snow is deep, over shoes, patterns, wooden clogs, or wrapped coverings may help, depending on place and means. Nothing about this is sleek. Fashion has stepped aside and allowed survival to dress itself. Survival, unfortunately, has chosen several bulky shapes, and one smell of damp leather, a quirky tidbit, hides in the layers. People sometimes sew small pockets separately and tie them round the waist beneath the outer garments, especially women's clothing in parts of the 18th century. These tie-on pockets can hold keys, coins, sewing tools, food scraps, or mysterious household objects that must be found immediately and somehow never are. They're practical, hidden, and roomy enough to make modern shallow pockets look like a prank played by the tailoring industry. You tie, tuck, smooth, and adjust. Each movement is familiar but not effortless. Layers catch on each other. A sleeve twists. A stocking wrinkles under the foot. A pin must be placed carefully, because a misplaced pin can punish you all morning with the determination of a tiny metal philosopher. Buttons, hooks, laces, and ties all require fingers that are not numb, which is one reason warming your hands is not indulgence. It is equipment maintenance. The apron goes on last, plain and ready for work. It protects the clothing beneath from ash, grease, flour, splinters, mud, animal hair, and whatever else the day intends to fling at you. Aprons are not symbols of quaint domestic sweetness here. They are shields. If a garment beneath can be spared a wash or a stain, that is a victory. Washing cloth in winter is slow, wet, chilling labour, and drying heavy fabric indoors can fill the cabin with dampness. Cleanliness matters, but cleanliness must negotiate with weather, fuel, water, and time. Nobody is lightly tossing wool into a machine and selecting gentle cycle. Gentle cycle is still several centuries away. Probably drinking tea and feeling smug, you notice the colours around you. Many everyday clothes are brown, grey, undyed, dull blue, madder red, faded green, or whatever dyes, fibres, and wear have produced. Bright colours exist, but cost, access, and fading matter. A remote household may treasure a ribbon, a better kerchief, a Sunday garment, or a coat cut from purchased cloth. Daily winter clothing is quieter. It has the colour of earth, smoke, bark, sheep, work, and repeated washing in water that is far too cold to encourage joy. The texture of clothing shapes the whole body. Wool at the shoulder, linen at the wrist, leather at the foot, a belt or cord at the waist. The weight is constant, but reassuring. You're not separate from the weather, you are wrapped against it. Every layer traps a thin space of air, and each space becomes a small invisible blanket. Warmth is not one thing. It is many little delays placed between your skin and the cold. You step nearer the door and feel a draught test the seams at your cuffs. You tuck them tighter, the hem brushes your legs, the stockings hold, the cap sits firm. Your body, recently a shivering complaint, becomes almost capable. There is comfort in being properly bundled, even if properly bundled also means you move with the grace of a laundry pile that has developed chores. The cabin air remains cold beyond the hearth's reach, but your clothing gives you a private room of warmth. It moves with you, creaks with you, smells faintly of smoke with you. It has been grown, shorn, retted, spun, woven, cut, stitched, patched, and pulled into place. It is technology without buttons that glow. It is history touching your skin. You breathe out slowly, feel the layers hold, and face the day wrapped in the patient labour of many hands. The woodpile waits outside like a second pantry, only less edible and much more judgmental. You stand near it with the axe in hand, looking at the stacked lengths of timber beneath their crust of snow. Food keeps the body going, but wood keeps the food warm, the water liquid, the hands usable, and the room from becoming a beautifully arranged storage box for frozen people. Winter teaches arithmetic, and its favourite lesson is subtraction. Every log burned is one less log waiting. You brush snow from the nearest pieces and judge them by weight, sound, and feel. Dry wood answers differently than green wood. It is lighter, sharper at the edges, and when struck, it gives a cleaner note. Green wood feels heavy with trapped water, hisses in the fire, smokes badly, and generally behaves like a damp guest who refuses to leave. A mainstream historical fact rests in this daily labour. Households depending on wood heat need large quantities of fuel, and cutting, splitting, hauling, stacking, and drying firewood can consume many hours across the year. Warmth begins long before winter. It begins in the forest, under summer insects and autumn leaves, with somebody swinging metal into trees. You set a round of wood upright on a chopping block. The block is scarred by old blows, its surface split and darkened. You raise the axe, feeling the pull in shoulders and back, then bring it down. The blade bites, but the wood does not split completely. Of course it does not. Wood enjoys suspense. You work the axe free and strike again. This time the round cracks open, separating with a satisfying snap. Two halves fall aside onto the snow. The sound carries through the cold air. Chop, pause, breath, chop. The rhythm settles into your body. Your fingers tighten around the handle. The axe haft is smooth in places from use, rough in others where the grain catches the skin. It is not a decorative tool hung over a fireplace to make a room look rustic. It is a daily necessity, and it demands accuracy. A careless swing can ruin a boot, a block, or the rest of your week. The axe is helpful, yes, but only in the way a large animal is helpful when respected. Historians still argue whether fuel demands shaped settlement patterns more than people tend to admit, since nearby woodland, rights to gather timber and access to common lands could decide how comfortable or desperate a winter became. It is easy to look at a cabin and think of shelter first, food second, and landscape third, but the landscape is not scenery. It is the warehouse, pharmacy, fence supply, animal bedding source, building yard, and fuel reserve. A household without wood is not simply cold. It is cornered. You split another round. The grain twists, resisting the blade. Some wood opens cleanly, like it has been waiting to cooperate. Some knots fight with the intensity of a village argument. A wedge may be needed for larger or more stubborn pieces. Metal wedges, wooden gluts, mallets, and repeated blows help turn thick rounds into usable fuel. Your breath grows louder. Warmth comes from the work before it comes from the fire, which is a cruel little joke by the universe. Chop enough wood and you heat yourself twice, as the old saying goes. This sounds wise until your palms begin negotiating for retirement. The split pieces must be stacked to dry and to stay accessible. Stacking is not random. Bark side, air gaps, stable ends, protection from snow, distance from damp ground, all of it matters. Poorly stacked wood collapses, wet wood smokes. Buried wood becomes a winter treasure hunt conducted with numb fingers, which is not as fun as the phrase treasure hunt suggests. You lift split logs and place them in rows against a simple rack, under an overhang, or along a wall where wind can pass and snow can be brushed away. A quirky tidbit sits in the woodpile too. In some regions, people use specific woods for specific purposes, saving long-burning hardwood for night fires and using resinous softwood for quick flame or kindling. Birch bark, where available, is especially prized because it catches fire even when damp. Birch bark is basically nature's little apology note for making everything else wet. You tuck a curled strip aside, treating it like a valuable secret. The size of each piece tells you where it belongs. Thin sticks for kindling, wrist-thick pieces for building flame, larger split logs for steady heat. A slow overnight fire needs a different arrangement than a quick cooking blaze. The hearth is hungry in several moods. You learn to feed it according to the hour. Too much small wood, and the fire flares fast, then vanishes. Too large too soon, and it sulks. The cabin's comfort depends on a relationship with combustion that is less romantic than people imagine, and much more like managing a sleepy, smoky toddler. You haul an armload inside, the weight presses against your chest, bark flakes cling to your sleeve, snow melts into dark spots on the wood and onto your clothing. At the doorway, you pause and turn sideways, because armloads of firewood give the human body the elegance of a confused beetle. A few pieces clatter to the floor. You pretend this was intentional. No one believes you, not even the stool. Inside, the wood must be placed where it can dry further, but not so close to the fire that sparks find it. That line matters. A neat stack beside the hearth feels comforting, but comfort should not become kindling with ambition. You arrange the pieces carefully. The driest wood is kept easiest to reach. Damp wood sits farther back to warm and shed some moisture. Chips and splinters are swept together for starting flame later. Even the mess has value. The smell of fresh split wood brightens the smoky room. Oak smells dense and tannic. Pine carries resin. Birch has a clean, papery scent. Chestnut, maple, ash, beech, spruce. Each has its own behaviour under the blade and in the fire. People who depend on wood learn these differences the way modern people learn passwords. Except wood is more forgiving and less likely to lock you out of your own life. A good firewood tree becomes familiar before it becomes ash. Outside, more rounds wait. The pile is never simply done. That is the difficult part. Firewood labour stretches backward into the previous season and forward into every cold night ahead. You cut when weather allows. You haul when the sled path is firm. You split when hands can still grip. You stack before rain and snow ruin the effort. Winter does not ask whether you are tired. It only asks whether there is wood by the hearth. You return for another load, boots crunching over the packed path. The sky is pale, and the breath from your mouth drifts away. The axe rests against the block, blade dark against the snow. There is a plain satisfaction in the growing stack, not joy exactly, but relief with splinters. Each split piece is a future hour of warmth. Each row is a little argument against the night. You lift the axe again. The movement is slower now but surer. The blade falls, the wood opens, and the sound joins the quiet winter air. This is the mathematics of survival. Cords, armloads, coals, hours, meals, fingers warmed, water unfrozen. The numbers are not written on paper. They are stacked against the wall, measured in smoke, and felt in the ache of your shoulders. The cabin may be small, but its hunger for wood reaches into the forest. You answer it piece by piece, teaching the cold that for one more day, at least, you can still count. Beyond the ridge, another chimney sends up smoke, so faint in the pale air that you might miss it if you were not looking for signs of human stubbornness. Distance changes everything here. A neighbour is not someone separated from you by a fence and a questionable taste in music. A neighbour may be over a hill, through a stand of trees, across a frozen creek, and past enough snow to make every visit feel like a small expedition with social consequences. You stand at the edge of the cleared yard and look toward that distant thread of smoke. It comforts you more than you expect. A remote cabin is never only a private place. It belongs to a loose web of households, kin, obligations, favours, grudges, rumours, and shared tools. In the 18th century, especially in rural districts and frontier settlements, neighbours often rely on one another for labour that one household cannot easily manage alone. Barn raising, harvest work, quilting, butchering, road clearing, childbirth, illness, and emergencies all pull people together. Solitude may look dramatic from far away, but survival prefers a guest list. The path toward the ridge is narrow and uneven, pressed down by sled runners and boot tracks. You follow it carefully, carrying a small bundle under your arm. Perhaps it is a borrowed awl, a measure of meal, a twist of thread, or a message. Nothing travels empty-handed unless the matter is urgent or the traveller has forgotten how society works. Even a visit needs purpose, or at least the polite disguise of purpose. People may enjoy company, but company with a useful errand is easier to justify when chores multiply like mice. The forest opens and closes around you. Snow softens each stump and stone. The trees stand close enough to make the path feel private, and yet you know other feet have passed here. A broken twig, a heel mark, a dark smear where someone's boot dragged mud through snow. These signs matter. In thinly settled country, news moves by bodies, not wires. A person walking from one cabin to another carries weather reports, market prices, births, deaths, marriages, accidents, disputes, jokes, warnings, and possibly a recipe that everyone will pretend not to judge. Historians still argue whether neighbourly cooperation in remote communities should be seen as warm-hearted mutual aid or as a practical system of obligation enforced by reputation. The gentle answer is yes, probably both. People help because they care, because they may need help later, because kinship demands it, because custom expects it, and because being known as useless is socially expensive. A settlement has a memory. It remembers who came to lift a beam, who stayed away during sickness, who returned a borrowed tool rusty, and who brought the terrible turnips to supper again. You reach a split-rail fence half buried in snow. It marks a boundary, but not the kind that allows complete indifference. Fields, pastures, woodlots, and paths connect people. In some places, common lands or shared rights to graze animals, gather firewood, or use water remain deeply important. In others, private claims become sharper, fenced, measured, recorded, and argued over with impressive energy. Land is not just earth, it is food, inheritance, status, debt, and the cause of many conversations that begin politely and end with someone gripping a mug too tightly. A dog barks before you see the neighbouring cabin. It is a rough, sincere bark, the kind that says, "I have detected history approaching." You call out before stepping too close. This is good manners and also good survival, since nobody enjoys startling a household that owns tools, dogs, and possibly a musket. The door opens after a moment. A face appears in the dim gap, wrapped in a cap and framed by the warm smell of smoke. Recognition softens the air. Inside, the room is like and unlike the one you know. The same kind of hearth glow, the same hanging tools, the same smoke darkening the upper beams. Yet every household has its own arrangement, its own smells, its own little stubbornness. Here there may be a cradle near the fire, a loom frame along the wall, a better chest, a poorer table, more children, fewer chairs, a cat pretending to be furniture, or a shelf of pewter plates that suggests someone once had money or wants everyone to think so. You notice without staring, because staring is rude unless the cat is doing something ridiculous, in which case all rules are suspended. A quirky tidbit rests in the practice of borrowing. Some rural communities use tally sticks. Memory, knots, chalk marks, or household account books to track small debts, labour exchanges, and goods owed. Not every exchange involves coin. A day of work may be repaid with another day. A lent horse may be answered with help at harvest. A measure of salt may return as eggs, thread, or assistance. The economy is not cashless in a romantic sense. It is simply that coins are scarce, needs are many, and everyone is quietly running a complicated spreadsheet in their head without the mercy of columns. You hand over the bundle and receive what you came for. Perhaps a gimlet, a small iron tool for boring holes, or news from town carried by someone passing through. The news is late, of course. News here often arrives already tired. A law has changed, a ship has come in, a family has moved west. Someone's cousin has married badly, which may be the most enduring news category in human history. You listen, nod, ask careful questions, and file away what matters: markets, taxes, road conditions, illness, religious meetings, militia musters, rumours of conflict. All of it can affect a remote household. Hospitality appears in small forms: a warm cup, a stool near the hearth, a bite of bread if bread can be spared. Visitors bring variety, and variety is precious in winter. Conversation itself becomes a kind of warmth. Voices fill corners that wind cannot reach. Someone complains about the weather, because some traditions are older than nations. Someone else says the snow is good for tracking animals or protecting roots. This is the cheerful tyranny of practical thinking. Even misery is expected to submit a useful report. You are careful with your words. Communities need trust, but trust is not the same as softness. Reputation travels faster than feet. A careless comment can return to you wearing boots. A broken promise may linger for years. In remote life, privacy exists, but not quite as modern people imagine it. Everyone does not know everything, but enough people know enough things. The settlement listens through walls, roads, fields, churches, mills, and markets. Gossip is not merely entertainment, it is social weather. The visit cannot last too long. Daylight is limited, chores are waiting, and storms do not ask whether the conversation has reached a natural pause. You rise, return thanks, accept a message to carry back, and step out into the cold with a little more than you brought. A tool, perhaps. A warning. A bit of local news. The reassurance that another fire is burning beyond the trees. The walk home feels different. The same snow lies underfoot, the same branches bend under frost, but the woods seem less empty now. Each distant household is a point of warmth in a wide, cold map. You understand that remoteness does not mean being unconnected. It means connection costs effort. Every visit spends time, strength, daylight, and trust. Every favour ties one household to another with invisible cord. You climb the ridge and look back once. Smoke rises from the neighbour's chimney, then thins into the sky. Ahead, another roof waits among the trees. Between the two, the path holds the marks of passing feet. In that narrow packed line lies a whole human system. Borrowed iron, shared labour, cautious kindness, old quarrels, winter news, and the stubborn belief that no cabin, however remote, should have to face the cold entirely alone. The light fades early, as if the winter sun has better places to be and no intention of explaining itself. By late afternoon the cabin has already entered its long indoor hour, that quiet stretch when the fire becomes the room's clock and every object seems to lean closer to the glow. Outside the snow loses its brightness. Inside, hands keep moving. You sit near the hearth with work gathered in your lap. In the 18th century, evening is not empty time. It is not a soft little bonus at the end of the day reserved for streaming something mildly forgettable while pretending to fold laundry. It is working time, talking time, mending time, making time. A mainstream historical fact settles into the firelit room. Before widespread artificial lighting, households often organise tasks around daylight, saving dimmer jobs, small repairs, spinning, knitting, carving, sorting, and quiet domestic work for the hours near flame or candle. A candle stands nearby, but it is not lit yet. Candles cost labour or money. Tallow candles, made from rendered animal fat, can smoke, smell, and burn unevenly. Beeswax candles are cleaner and brighter, but more expensive, the kind of thing you do not casually waste just because the room looks moody. Rushlights may be used in some regions, made from dried rushes dipped in fat, offering a small, temporary flame. Light here is not abundant, it is rationed. Darkness is the default setting, and brightness is a household decision, so you work by firelight as long as you can. The flames move constantly, making shadows lift and shrink over your hands. You are mending a tear in cloth, perhaps a sleeve worn thin at the elbow, perhaps a stocking with a heel that has surrendered after too much honest service. The needle flashes when it catches the light. Thread pulls through fabric with a tiny rasp. You knot, tuck, and stitch. The work is small, but its importance is not. A garment repaired tonight may be warmth preserved tomorrow. Historians still argue whether the constant handwork of rural households should be counted mainly as economic production, family maintenance, or cultural training passed quietly through repetition. It is all of these things at once. A child watching a needle learns more than a stitch. They learn thrift, patience, gender expectations, household rhythm, and the serious moral weight of not losing the good scissors. The good scissors are practically a family elder. Across the room, wool waits in a basket. It has been cleaned, carded, or partly prepared, depending on the stage of the work. Spinning may continue with a drop spindle or spinning wheel, turning fibre into thread through a rhythm that seems almost hypnotic once the hands know it. Twist, draw, wind, twist, draw, wind. The thread forms slowly, and slowness is the point. Cloth is not born in shops. It comes from animals, fields, washing, combing, spinning, weaving, cutting, and sewing. Every shirt contains time. Every blanket contains weather, pasture, and fingers. The wheel, if there is one, gives a soft whirring sound. It blends with the fire's crackle and the occasional pop of sap in the wood. The noise is soothing, but not effortless. Your foot keeps the treadle moving. Your hand draws out fibre in just the right amount. Too much twist and the yarn becomes hard. Too little and it drifts apart, which is a rude thing for yarn to do after all this attention. The process looks peaceful only because the skill has swallowed the struggle. A quirky tidbit hides in the history of handwork. Some communities hold spinning gatherings or work bees where women and girls produce thread while sharing news, songs, courtship, gossip, and the ancient art of judging someone's character from how they handle flax. A spinning bee can be practical and social at once. Imagine a group project where the final result is yarn, and also everyone knowing exactly who has been flirting near the mill. Efficient. Really. Near the wall, a wooden spoon or peg is being shaped with a small knife. The blade moves carefully along the grain, lifting thin curls that fall like pale ribbons. Carving is slow evening work when light allows. A kneaded peg, a repaired handle, a wedge, a toy, a shuttle, a bowl edge smoothed after cracking. All these small wooden things belong to a world where repair comes before replacement. The knife must be sharp, the hand must be steady, the fire must not trick the eye too much, because carving your thumb is historically authentic but not recommended. The cabin's interior becomes a workshop without changing its name. The table holds scraps, tools, thread, crumbs, and maybe a sleeping cat who has decided that productivity is something other creatures can enjoy. The hearth dries a damp mitten. A basket stores rags for future use. Broken pottery might be saved for patches, weights, or drainage. Bits of leather become hinges, straps, ties, or shoe repairs. Nothing useful vanishes from attention simply because it is small. The whole household is a quiet argument against waste. You pause and flex your fingers. Fine work stiffens the hands differently than chopping or hauling. The cold makes joints slow. Smoke dries the eyes. The light flickers just when the needle must pass through a narrow place, which feels personal. You bring the cloth closer to the flame, then pull it back because sparks are tiny chaotic philosophers with no respect for fabric. The balance between seeing and not burning is delicate. History contains many such elegant choices. At last, the candle is lit. A sliver of flame catches the wick, trembles, then steadies. The new light is small but golden, more focused than the hearth. It shows the tabletop, the bowl, the needle, the grain of wood, the worn shine where hands have touched the bench for years. A single candle does not banish darkness. It negotiates with it. Corners remain shadowed. Rafters fade upward. Faces become half-lit, soft and thoughtful, with soot and fatigue kindly blurred. Candlelight is flattering, which may be why portraits loved it. Also because nobody had flash photography, thank goodness. The evening deepens, boredom is present, but not in the modern restless way that demands rescue every 12 seconds. It is heavier, slower, easier to fold into rhythm, stitch after stitch, turn after turn, scrape after scrape. Work gives the mind a narrow path to walk. Thoughts wander gently along it. Weather, food stores, neighbours, animals, debts, old songs, the strange dream you had and absolutely should not mention, because someone will interpret it. Some households read aloud if there is a book and enough light. The Bible, almanacs, sermons, chapbooks, ballads, or practical manuals may occupy winter evenings. Books are treasured where they are scarce, handled with care, and sometimes read repeatedly until the familiar words settle into memory. In other homes, stories carry the evening without paper, a tale half remembered, a local warning, a family history, a joke old enough to have lost several teeth. The spoken word costs no candle, though it may cost patience if the storyteller refuses to arrive at the point. You return to the mending. The tear closes slowly under your hand. The repaired place will not be invisible, but invisibility is overrated. The patch says the garment is still useful. The thread says someone took time. The uneven line of stitches says human fingers did this under winter light while the fire shifted and the night pressed against the walls. By now, the cabin feels smaller, not in a cramped way, but in a gathered way. The circle of light holds the people, the tools, the cloth, the shavings, the quiet. Outside, darkness belongs to trees and snow. Inside, candle and hearth divide the hours into small tasks completed one by one. The hands continue, tired but steady, keeping boredom from rising too high, keeping clothing whole, tools serviceable, and the mind softly occupied. In the long cold season, peace is not the absence of work. It is the rhythm of work gentle enough to do beside the fire, while shadows breathe along the walls and the night slowly passes. The animals announce the morning before anyone has politely asked them to. A hen mutters from her corner with the cranky dignity of a tiny landlord. Somewhere beyond the wall, a cow shifts her weight and knocks a hoof against wood. A pig, if there is one, makes a sound that suggests deep personal disappointment with the entire management structure of winter. You listen for a moment and understand that livestock do not care whether you're tired. They have stomachs. They have habits. They have expectations. You step into the cold yard with feed in a small pail, and the air greets your face with all the tenderness of a frozen shovel. The animals need tending before the day becomes anything else. In an 18th century remote household, livestock can mean food, labour, trade, manure, leather, wool, milk, eggs, and risk. A mainstream historical fact stands plainly in the packed snow. Animals are central to many rural economies, not just as meat, but as living sources of milk, eggs, fibre, traction, and fertility for fields. A cow is not merely a cow, she is breakfast, butter, future calves, manure for the garden, and a large warm creature with absolutely no interest in your schedule. The small shed or lean-to stands close to the cabin, built low against the wind. It may be rough, dark, and fragrant in a way that no candle maker has ever tried to recreate. Straw, hay, dung, damp wood, animal breath, and cold air combine into a smell that is strong but not meaningless. It is the smell of stored summer passing through winter bodies. You lift the latch and step inside. Warmth meets you. Not cosy hearth, warmth, but thick animal warmth, damp and alive. The cow turns her head, slow and solemn, chewing as if she's considering a legal matter. Her coat is rougher in winter, her breath visible in the dimness. If she's giving milk, she must be fed and milked regularly. If fodder is scarce, milk may diminish. If she falls ill, the whole household feels the danger. You lay down hay, shaking it loose in a dry pile. The cow noses into it at once, approving without gratitude. Animals are excellent at accepting service as if it were long overdue. Hay matters because grass has vanished under frost. Cutting, drying, storing, and protecting hay from rain and rot are summer and autumn tasks that decide winter survival. The loft or stack is not just storage, it is a bank account with stems. Every forkful fed now has been harvested earlier by sweat, timing, and weather luck. Too little hay, and winter becomes frightening. Too wet, and it spoils. Too exposed, and animals, mould, or wind take their share. You begin to see that the cow is eating July, one mouthful at a time. Historians still argue whether small rural households with mixed livestock should be viewed as largely self-sufficient or deeply dependent on wider markets. Seasonal labour and community exchange. A family might produce milk, eggs, wool, meat, and manure at home, yet still needs salt tools, breeding stock, grazing rights, veterinary knowledge, and access to mills or markets. Self-sufficiency is a tempting phrase, but it can be a little smug. Even the stubborn cabin depends on roads, neighbours, weather, and someone somewhere making iron. The hens are next. They gather with brisk little steps, heads bobbing, eyes bright, looking permanently outraged. Chickens in winter are both useful and disappointing. They may lay fewer eggs when daylight is short, which feels rude, though biologically fair. You scatter grain or scraps, and they rush toward it as if this humble offering has finally justified your existence. Their feathers puff against the cold. One hen finds a bit of food, clucks triumphantly, then immediately loses it to another hen with stronger opinions. Poultry politics is fast and merciless. You check the nest box or tucked straw corner for eggs. One lies there, still faintly warm under a bit of straw. You pick it up carefully, feeling its smooth weight in your palm. An egg in winter seems almost extravagant. It is protein wrapped in fragility, a small oval promise. You tuck it safely into a cloth or pocket and move as if carrying royal treasure. Though royal treasure generally does not become breakfast if dropped, a quirky tidbit belongs to winter poultry keeping. Some households use chalk, lime wash, or other methods to preserve surplus egg in seasons when hens lay more, storing them for leaner months. Not every egg is eaten fresh, and not every preserved egg inspires modern confidence. But when winter stretches long, people become practical in ways that would make a modern refrigerator feel underappreciated. The pig, if housed nearby, greets you with noisy enthusiasm or suspicion. Pigs are impressive converters of scraps into meat, which is a polite way of saying they will eat nearly anything and then look for more. They may receive kitchen scraps, bran mash, roots, acorns when available, whey from cheese making, or other feed depending on region and season. In many rural households, pigs are valuable because they can fatten on resources humans cannot use as easily. They are also strong, clever, and capable of turning a weak pen into a philosophical question about boundaries. You pour feed into a trough and step back quickly because the pig's manners are not refined. The animal shoves forward, snorting and chomping, utterly committed to the meal. You watch the sturdy body, the bristled back, the restless ears. Pork, salted and smoked, can help carry a household through winter, but raising the animal means feeding it through months when feed itself is precious. The decision to keep livestock always contains a calculation. What goes in? What comes out? How long until benefit? How much risk before then? The pig does not care for your accounting, the pig cares for the trough. Manure must be managed too, because history loves giving every useful thing an unpleasant side quest. Straw leaves used as bedding absorb waste, then become material for compost or field dressing. This is not glamorous, but it is fertility. Soil needs feeding as surely as animals do. You fork damp bedding aside, add fresh straw, and try not to think too deeply about your footwear. The cycle is plain. Fields feed animals, animals feed fields, households survive somewhere in the middle, and boots suffer quietly. You break ice from a water trough with a stick or the back of a tool. The crust gives way, and the water beneath trembles darkly. Animals need water even when everything freezes. Carrying it to them or clearing access becomes another repeated chore. A cow drinks deeply, steam rising from her muzzle. The hens peck at snow but still need proper water. The pig makes its own views known through sound, movement, and general barnyard drama. The animals also change the soundscape of the place. A cabin without livestock is one kind of quiet. A cabin with animals is never fully still. Hooves scrape, wings rustle. A cow sighs like a tired aunt. Hens argue over invisible matters. A pig tests the universe with its nose. These sounds can comfort, because living creatures nearby mean food, labour, and company. They can also worry you. A cough, a limp, silence where there should be noise. All of it catches the ear. You stand in the doorway of the shed and look back toward the cabin. Smoke rises from the chimney, and behind you the animals settle into eating. Their breath warms the dim shelter. Their bodies turn stored grain and hay into milk, eggs, meat, manure, and continued obligation. They are wealth, work, worry, smell, and companionship bundled in feathers, hide, and bristles. They make the household less alone and much less tidy. When you return inside, you carry the egg, the smell of hay, and a few bits of straw clinging to your clothes like evidence. The room feels warmer after the yard. You set the egg safely aside and hold your hands near the fire. Outside, the animals continue under the same hard weather, each one dependent on human care, each one giving something back in its own season. Winter presses on all creatures together. The cabin shelters people, the shed shelters animals, and between them passes the daily exchange that keeps life breathing in the cold. The storm begins as a soft tapping against the shutter, almost polite, as if winter has come to the door wearing mittens and pretending it only wants a word. Then the wind rises, and politeness ends. Snow sweeps sideways through the trees. The cabin walls give small wooden groans. The roof takes the weight and answers with slow, settling creaks that make you glance upward more often than is comfortable. You stay inside because leaving would be foolish, and also because the outside world has temporarily become a spinning white argument. The doorway is banked with snow before midday. The path is gone. The yard has lost its edges. Every stump, barrel, fence rail, and stored tool disappears under one broad pale blanket. It is beautiful in the way a locked door can be beautiful when you're on the wrong side of it. Storm days in a remote 18th century cabin change the shape of time. A mainstream historical fact sits quietly beneath the sound of wind. Before modern forecasting, rural households depend on observation, season, experience, and signs in the sky, animals, air, and clouds to guess what weather may come. Some guesses are wise, some are wishful, some are delivered by an elderly neighbour who has been wrong since 1743 but remains very confident. A storm can still surprise everyone, which is rude but historically consistent. You take stock without making a ceremony of it. Wood near the hearth, water in a bucket, meal in a sack, salt meat remaining, candles counted, bedding dry, tools indoors. Anything left outside may not be seen again until thaw, or may reappear in spring looking personally offended. The cabin becomes a small island, and all islands require inventory. The wind presses at the cracks, testing the walls with long, whining breaths. Snow drives against the shutter and finds tiny openings, leaving fine white dust along the sill. You wipe it away with a cloth, then stuff the worst gap with a rag. The rag freezes slightly at the edge, which is not inspiring. Still, it helps. Much of winter life is made of small helps. A rag here, a board there, a pot moved closer, a blanket shifted. Survival is often not one heroic gesture. It is 40 minor adjustments performed by cold fingers. The fire must be watched carefully. A storm can change the chimney draft, pushing smoke back into the room or pulling sparks upward too quickly. You feed the flame with steady restraint. Too much wood now means less later. Too little means damp air and stiff hands. The open hearth glows, but even its comfort feels enclosed by the weather outside. Smoke rolls once, low and sour, before climbing properly. You cough, wave it away, and give the chimney a look of deep disappointment. The chimney does not apologize. Historians still argue whether winter storms strengthened household self-reliance or revealed how dependent remote families remained on neighbours, stored labour, and seasonal preparation. A storm can make a cabin feel independent, sealed against the world. Yet every log, nail, bag of grain, cured ham, blanket, tool, and skill inside has arrived through older networks of work and exchange. Isolation is often a temporary illusion produced by heavy snow and a dramatic sky. You move through the room, choosing tasks that can be done without opening the door. A handle needs tightening, a basket needs sorting, a cord can be twisted. Kindling can be split into smaller pieces indoors, carefully, with a small hatchet and a stump placed where flying chips will not land in supper. Wet things are moved farther from drafts. Dry things are protected from sparks. The storm keeps you close to every object, and every object suddenly matters. There is a special kind of boredom that arrives when travel becomes impossible. It is not the ordinary boredom of having nothing to do. There is always something to do. It is the boredom of knowing that the walls have become the edge of the universe. You cannot visit, you cannot check the far field, you cannot walk to the ridge, you cannot pretend that you are choosing to stay in. Choice has been removed by snow, which is very on brand for snow. A quirky tidbit belongs to storms and doors. In some snowy regions, households keep a shovel, spade, or digging tool inside specifically because an outward opening door can be blocked by drifts. Being trapped indoors by your own weatherproofing is a design flaw with excellent comic timing, unless it is happening to you. You look at the doorway and respect the shovel a little more. The storm thickens. The cabin grows dim even during the day. The windows show only shifting whiteness. Candlelight may be needed before evening, but you hesitate. Candles are precious. You sit near the hearth and let firelight do what it can. The flame turns the room amber while the storm makes the outside world colourless. The contrast is so strong it feels almost unreal, as if two seasons are pressing against the same wall. You listen for dangerous sounds. A branch cracking too near the roof. A change in the chimney. A leak beginning overhead. The low complaint of a beam under weight. Snow can be soft and still be heavy, which is one of its quieter betrayals. In regions where roofs are vulnerable, people may rake, shovel, or knock snow away when weather permits, but during a fierce storm you may simply wait and hope the pitch is steep enough and the structure sound enough. Hope is not a construction material, but it is often present at the site. Food becomes simpler. A pot of thick soup, mush, beans, or warmed leftovers can stay near the coals. You eat from a bowl held close in both hands, grateful for heat as much as flavour. The storm gives appetite a practical edge. You do not crave novelty so much as steadiness. Warm liquid, salt, fat, grain. Enough. The spoon moves slowly, and the fire pops in approval or perhaps random combustion. It is difficult to tell. As afternoon fades, the storm seems to fill the entire sky and mind. You speak less. The wind does the talking. It rattles the shutter, hums at the eaves, and slides along the logs. Sometimes it drops suddenly, and the silence after it feels enormous. Then another gust strikes, and the cabin answers with a shiver through its frame. You realize how much courage is built into ordinary walls. Not loud courage, just the courage of staying upright. Night arrives without a clear sunset. Darkness simply gathers inside the whiteness. The door remains closed. The fire remains alive. You bank it with care, not for sleep yet, but for endurance. The storm may last through the night, perhaps longer. There is no message coming, no lamp down the road, no quick rescue from inconvenience. There is only preparation meeting weather in the dim light of a single room. You settle close to the hearth, wrapped in wool, listening to snow strike wood like handfuls of dry grain. The world beyond the walls has vanished, but the cabin holds its small circle, flame, breath, tools, stores, bedding, warm bowl, steady hands. The storm keeps speaking, and you do not answer. You simply remain, conserving wood, conserving light, conserving movement. While winter spends itself against the roof, a cough sounds different in winter. It does not float away into open air or vanish under birdsong. It stays in the cabin, dry and close, making everyone pause for half a breath. You feel it in your own chest too, that tight scratch beneath the ribs, the little warning rasp that says the cold has found another doorway. The fire warms your hands, but it cannot promise that the body will behave. Sickness in a remote 18th century cabin is not a separate event from daily life. It arrives among chores, meals, animals, damp clothing, smoke, and worry. A mainstream historical fact settles quietly into the room. Before germ theory becomes widely accepted in the 19th century, many people explain illness through ideas such as imbalance, bad air, chills, humours, divine providence, contagion in some forms, or local custom passed down through families and healers. Some observations are practical, some are mistaken. Some remedies help, Some merely keep a person busy while the body does the hard work. You sit near the hearth and hold a warm cup in both hands. The drink may be made from herbs gathered in warmer months. Mint, sage, thyme, horehound, yarrow, elderflower, chamomile, or whatever grows in the region and has a reputation for usefulness. The steam touches your face. It smells green, bitter, and faintly medicinal. You sip carefully. The heat eases your throat for a moment, and that moment matters. In a world with few quick cures, relief itself becomes valuable. A shelf or chest may hold the household's small pharmacy, dried leaves tied in bundles, jars of ointment, a little honey, vinegar, spirits, salt, cloth strips, goose grease, resin, roots, bark, perhaps a purchased powder wrapped in paper, perhaps a treasured remedy copied from a receipt book. Recipes for medicines often travel through families the way recipes for pies do, though with slightly more urgency and occasionally worse flavour. The line between kitchen and sick room is thin. The same hearth that cooks breakfast warms poultices, heats water, simmers teas, and dries bandages. You rub your hands together and feel the skin rough from cold and work. Cracked knuckles, chilblains, sore joints, frost-nipped ears, smoke-irritated eyes, toothache, fever, coughs, stomach troubles, infected cuts, and exhaustion all belong to the season's ordinary dangers. Modern medicine has trained people to think of illness as something named, tested, charted, and treated under bright lights. Here, sickness is watched in signs: skin heat, pulse, appetite, breathing, sleep, swelling, colour, complaint, silence. Silence can worry more than groaning. Groaning at least proves the patient still has opinions. Historians still argue whether household medicine in rural communities should be seen mainly as superstition, practical folk knowledge, or a blended system that used whatever tools people could reach. The answer resists neat judgment. People may pray, bleed, purge, sweat, dose, wrap, rest, warm, cool, and consult, sometimes all for the same illness. A remedy might be based on long observation. Another might be based on a theory that sounds confident and does absolutely nothing helpful. Confidence, regrettably, has never required accuracy. You prepare a simple poultice, perhaps flaxseed meal, bread, herbs, or mashed roots are mixed with warm water and wrapped in cloth. It is placed against a sore chest, a swollen joint, or a tender spot, depending on need and belief. The warmth comforts. The smell is earthy and damp. The cloth must not be too hot, because burning a sick person is generally considered poor service, even by the relaxed standards of the age. You test it against your wrist first, muttering softly, as if the poultice might listen. A quirky tidbit waits in the world of remedies. Onions are sometimes placed in rooms, worn, eaten, roasted, or applied in various folk treatments, credited with drawing out sickness or easing congestion. The onion has enjoyed a long medical career for such a humble bulb. It has been soup, seasoning, charm, medicine, and social deterrent. Few plants have done so much while making everyone's breath less welcome. If illness worsens, help may be distant. A physician, surgeon, midwife, herbalist, wise woman, minister, or experienced neighbour might be called, depending on the place, the problem, and who can be reached. Travel costs time and strength, snow, mud, darkness, and distance decide how quickly care arrives. In some areas, trained physicians are rare or expensive. In others, town practitioners serve wide districts. Much treatment begins at home because home is where the patient is, and because waiting for someone else may take longer than the fever allows. You imagine a messenger sent through cold air with a note tucked close, or a person walking quickly to a neighbour who has handled such matters before. The request may be for herbs, a lancet, advice, help with a birth, help setting a bone, help sitting through the night. Illness pulls communities into the cabin in ways that ordinary chores may not. Even quarrels soften sometimes when a child burns with fever or an elder cannot rise. Sometimes they do not soften, because human beings remain human even when wrapped in blankets. The sickbed itself is arranged for warmth and watching. A person may be placed near the hearth but not too close to smoke. Bedding is shaken and dried. A cup is kept nearby. Broth is offered, then offered again later when it has been refused with the tragic dignity of the unwell. Someone checks the fire. Someone counts breaths without admitting it. Someone whispers that the fever has broken or has not. Sleep becomes a sign people study as carefully as weather. You take a small pot and warm broth in it, perhaps made from bones saved for just such need. The smell is mild, salty, comforting. Broth carries nourishment when chewing feels impossible. It is easy to romanticize hearty rustic meals, but sickness often asks for gentler food, thin porridge, warm milk, toast soaked soft, tea with honey, broth spooned slowly. The spoon reaches the mouth, a little is swallowed. This is counted as progress. In illness, victory shrinks to a swallow, a clearer breath, a cooler forehead. Some remedies are harsher: bleeding, blistering, emetics, purges, and strong preparations appear in medical practice of the era, especially among formally trained practitioners influenced by older theories of balance and evacuation. You may be grateful, quietly, that the household reaches first for warmth, rest, fluids, and familiar herbs. Not all old care is gentle, and not all modern judgment should be smug. People act from the knowledge available to them, from fear, from habit, and from love sharpened by helplessness. The cabin seems to quiet around sickness. Tools are set down more softly, the door is open less often, voices lower, even the fire is tended with a gentler hand, as if flame can be encouraged not to startle anyone. You sit and listen to breathing in the low room, aware of how fragile warmth can be when it's carried inside a body. Outside, winter presses cold against the walls. Inside, hands do what they can: brew, wrap, watch, soothe, pray, feed, wait. The cup grows empty. The herbs leave a bitter trace on your tongue. Your chest loosens a little. Or perhaps you only hope it does. Hope is part of household medicine too, not because it cures everything, but because without it the long night becomes harder to cross. You place another log on the fire and keep the water warm. In this small room, care is not dramatic, it is steady. A cloth changed, a spoon lifted, a forehead touched. A flame kept alive while the body, mysterious and stubborn, tries to find its way back to ease. Night gathers close enough to feel like another wall. The fire's settled into a deep bed of coals, red at the centre, black at the edges, breathing out heat in slow waves. The cabin does not offer much light now. It offers glow, shadow, and the kind of quiet that invites words to become larger than they are. You sit low beside the hearth, listening as the wood shifts and the dark corners seem to lean forward. This is when stories begin. Not with a grand announcement, not with someone clearing a throat like a stage performer about to ruin everyone's peace. The words simply arrive after work slows and the room has no more appetite for silence. A memory is mentioned, a verse is repeated, a local tale is pulled from the air as if it has been hanging in the rafters all along, just waiting for the right amount of darkness. In the 18th century, storytelling is not merely entertainment. A mainstream historical fact rests in the warm gloom. In many rural households, oral tradition, scripture, ballads, almanac lore, and family memory help pass knowledge, values, warnings, and identity across generations. Not everyone reads easily, not every household has many books, but almost everyone can listen. A story needs no candle, no ink, and no shelf space, which makes it wonderfully suited to a room where supplies are counted and darkness arrives early. You hear a tale about a traveller who ignores advice and tries to cross a ridge during bad weather. Naturally, the traveller meets trouble, because stories have never been shy about punishing overconfidence. Perhaps the road vanishes. Perhaps a strange light appears between the trees. Perhaps the traveller hears bells where no sleigh could pass. The details shift depending on who tells it. The lesson does not. Stay humble. Respect weather. Do not assume the forest is impressed by your boots. The voice telling the story is calm, almost drowsy, which somehow makes it stranger. Firelight lifts one cheek, leaves the other in shadow, and the listener's mind kindly supplies everything the room cannot show. Outside, a branch scrapes the wall with perfect timing. Everyone pretends not to notice too much. This is one of the great old pleasures of winter storytelling. Half the fear comes from the tale, and half comes from the building politely helping. Historians still argue whether such winter tales should be read mainly as superstition, moral instruction, social bonding, or a way to explain real dangers in memorable form. A ghost at the frozen creek may be only a ghost, if one can say that calmly while sitting in a dark room, but it may also be a warning about thin ice, drunken travel, loneliness, or the grief left by someone who never came home. Folklore wears strange clothing, but underneath it often carries practical shoes. You shift closer to the fire. The coals pulse. Someone recalls a family story, not frightening, just old. A grandmother who crossed the sea with a trunk and 2 silver spoons. An uncle who once lost a cow for 3 days and found her standing in a neighbour's shed, looking as if she'd always paid rent there. A child born during a storm, a harvest so poor that turnips became breakfast, dinner, supper, and emotional damage. These stories do not need perfect accuracy to matter. They place the household inside time. They say, others endured, and now you are here, trying not to burn the porridge. A quirky tidbit belongs to old household storytelling. Almanacs often supply more than dates and weather guesses. They can include jokes, medical advice, moral sayings, moon phases, riddles, poems, and bits of practical guidance, making them a kind of pocket-sized annual internet, except slower, flammable, and much less likely to show you an advertisement for shoes after you mention shoes once. An almanac may sit near the hearth, thumbed and stained, its predictions debated long after the weather has already embarrassed it. Scripture enters the evening too, a psalm, a proverb, a passage remembered by heart or read aloud if light allows. The rhythm of familiar words steadies the room. In many households, religious language shapes how people understand suffering, gratitude, death, weather, hunger, and hope. A prayer may be said for health, for travellers, for animals, for the harvest sleeping beneath snow, for those far away. The words may be formal or plain. Either way, they rise into the smoke-dark air and settle there among beams, pots, and drying wool. Then comes a ballad. It may be sung softly, not with polished performance, but with the worn confidence of something known by repetition. Ballads carry news, tragedy, courtship, crime, migration, war, miracles, and extremely poor romantic choices. Some have crossed oceans in memory. Some change names and landscapes as they move. A tune learned in one valley may reappear in another with a different ending, because songs are travellers and not always honest ones. You listen as the melody moves slowly through the cabin. The voice is not perfect. It does not need to be. The sound fills the small room with more than warmth. It fills it with human presence. The fire burns lower. The shadows sway. For a while, the cold outside seems distant, pushed back by rhyme, memory, and the odd comfort of hearing sorrow turned into pattern. The children, if there are children in the room, know which stories are meant to scare them and which are meant to teach them while pretending to scare them. They listen with wide eyes, then ask for the most frightening part again, because children have always been little scholars of terror when bedtime approaches. Someone tells them not to be silly. Someone else repeats the part about the mysterious hoof prints. This is how discipline fails in a cosy way. Not all stories are dark. Some are jokes polished by long use, passed from mouth to mouth until no one knows who first owned them. A foolish farmer, a sly servant, a proud gentleman, a minister outwitted by a child, an animal behaving better than its owner. Laughter rises softly, careful not to wake anyone already drifting. The jokes may be old enough to creak, but so does the furniture, and nobody throws that out either. Rumour may slip in near the edges. A strange illness in another settlement, a dispute over land, a trader who overcharged, a road said to be passable, though everyone doubts the person who said it, a distant war or political quarrel, transformed by repetition until it becomes both news and story in a remote household. Information often arrives wrapped in uncertainty. You learn to listen for what may be useful, what may be exaggerated, and what is probably nonsense but entertaining enough to keep. The fire settles again. The last tale softens rather than ends. A person lost in the woods finds a light. A sailor survives a crossing. A mother dreams of spring before the thaw. The room grows sleepy around the words. You feel how storytelling changes the size of the cabin. It makes the room wider by filling it with other places, and smaller by drawing everyone into the same circle of listening. The coals glow low. The night beyond the walls remains dark, but it no longer feels empty. It is crowded now with memory, warning, prayer, song, rumour, and a few ridiculous jokes that will survive simply because they are easier to remember than sensible advice. You sit with your hands folded near the warmth, letting the last words fade into the crackle of ash. The cabin holds the stories the way it holds heat, imperfectly, tenderly, and just long enough to carry you through another cold hour. The thaw begins without drama. No trumpet sounds from the ridge. No messenger arrives to announce that winter has been defeated and should kindly pack its things. Instead, you notice a drip. It falls from the edge of the roof, slow and bright, landing in the snow below with a tiny hollow sound. Then another follows, then another. The rhythm is uneven, almost shy. For weeks the world has seemed locked in place, hard as iron, white as bone. And now one drop of water has the nerve to suggest change. You stand in the doorway and watch it fall, deeply impressed by a leak in the sky. The air smells different. Not warm exactly, because calling it warm would be legally questionable, but softer. The sharpness has left the wind's teeth. The snow has begun to slump around fence posts and tree trunks, pulling back from dark bark in widening rings. Beneath the eaves, ice grows thin and cloudy. The path is no longer a clean packed strip. It is a treacherous mixture of snow, mud, meltwater, and personal betrayal. A mainstream historical fact sits in this wet little transformation. In many rural 18th century communities, late winter and early spring bring a demanding season of mud, flooding, thawing roads, livestock strain, maple sugaring in some regions, and preparation for planting. The end of deep cold does not mean rest. It means a new kind of work, one that arrives wearing damp boots and smelling faintly of manure. You step carefully into the yard. The snow holds for 2 steps, then gives under your heel with a soft collapse. Meltwater runs in narrow channels, finding low ground, pooling near stones, slipping beneath old ice. The earth appears in patches, dark and saturated, as if the land has been holding its breath too long and now exhales mud. Your shoe sinks. You pull it free with a sound that is not elegant. Spring is very good at making people less dignified. Near the woodpile, the lowest logs are damp where snow has melted against them. You move what you can, brushing away wet bark and setting pieces where air may reach them. Fuel is still needed, the nights remain cold, and a thaw can be cruelly reversible. One soft afternoon does not end the season. The sky may smile at noon and freeze your bucket by morning. Weather enjoys mixed messaging more than any reasonable person should. You look toward the trees and hear water everywhere. It drips from branches, it trickles under snow, it runs from the roof, it whispers along the ditch. After months of silence hardened by frost, the world has become talkative. Birds add to it, tentative at first, a thin call from a branch, another from the brush. Not full spring music yet, but rehearsal. The birds sound as if they are checking whether the management has improved. Historians still argue whether the emotional importance of spring thaw in rural life is best understood through agriculture, bodily relief, religious symbolism, or simple exhaustion after winter confinement. You feel all of it at once. The thaw promises planting, movement, grazing, trade, visits, repairs, and sunlight that stays longer. It also promises mud, swollen streams, rotting stores, weak animals, and roads so bad they seem designed by someone with a grudge against wheels. Hope arrives, but it does not wipe its feet. You find the first green thing near the cabin wall, where reflected warmth from the logs has melted a narrow strip of snow. It is small and stubborn, a blade or shoot pushing through flattened grass and old leaves. You crouch to look at it. The plant is not impressive in size. It will not be winning any botanical awards, but after months of white and grey, its green is almost loud. You resist the urge to congratulate it, because dignity remains desirable, though not always available. A quirky tidbit belongs to early thaw in maple regions of northeastern North America. The best sap runs often come when nights freeze and days warm, sending sap moving through sugar maple trees. People tap trees, collect the clear sap, and boil it down into syrup or sugar, a process learned by European settlers from indigenous peoples who had long practiced maple sugaring. It takes a surprising amount of sap to make a small amount of sweetness, which feels like nature saying, yes, you may have a treat, but first, carry buckets. You imagine the steam from boiling sap rising into cold air, sweet and pale, while people tend fires for hours. Sugar is valuable. Maple sugar can be stored, traded, and used in cooking. The work is seasonal, urgent, and dependent on weather's narrow cooperation. Too cold and the sap slows, too warm and the season fades. The tree gives, but only on its own schedule, which is very tree-like behaviour. Back near the cabin, the doorway needs clearing again, not of snow now, but of slush. You scrape the threshold with a shovel, pushing aside heavy wet piles that weigh more than they look. The snow has become dense, sticky, and full of hidden water. It clings to the shovel. It slides back. It behaves like a tired animal refusing to move from a doorway. You mutter encouragement that sounds suspiciously like complaint. Inside, dampness becomes the enemy. Wet boots, wet hems, wet gloves, wet firewood, wet everything. The cabin smells of thaw now. Smoke, mud, soaked leather, melting wool, and old straw. You hang clothing where it may dry without scorching. You open the door briefly when the air allows, letting smoke and stale dampness escape. Fresh air enters with the scent of thawed earth. It feels almost extravagant, like airing the room with the entire future. Food stores must be checked. Potatoes or roots may sprout, soften or rot. Grain must stay dry. Salt meat must be watched. Mould and dampness grow more bold as cold retreats. The season of freezing has preserved some things by force, but the thaw gives decay permission to resume its career. You sort carefully, cutting away what can be saved, discarding what cannot, and trying not to take it personally when a turnip fails morally. The animals feel the change too. A cow lifts her head toward new smells. Hens scratch more eagerly where patches of ground appear. A pig tests the mud with professional interest. The yard becomes busy with tracks, hoof prints, claw marks, and melted channels. Manure frozen into hard lumps begins to soften, which is useful for fields and tragic for boots. The practical world returns all at once, and some of it is slippery. The road or track beyond the cabin grows uncertain. Sledding becomes harder as snow thins. Wheeled travel may still be impossible because mud swallows ruts and streams rise. This in-between time can isolate households in a new way. Winter roads across packed snow may disappear before summer roads are ready. The land is changing clothes, and everyone must wait while it struggles with the buttons. Still, light lasts longer. That alone changes the body. Evening does not fall quite so quickly. The sun reaches farther into the room, finding dust in the air and warming a patch of floor. You stand there for a moment, letting it touch your boots. The warmth is slight, but it belongs to the sky, not the hearth, and that makes it feel different. It is less smoky, less earned, more generous. You step outside once more as the day fades. Water drips from the roof in a steady line. The snow in the yard has lowered, revealing old footprints compressed into icy hollows. Beyond the trees, the sky holds a pale wash of gold. The cabin still needs fire. The night still close cold. But the season has shifted its weight. Winter is no longer sitting squarely on the roof. It is leaning away. You breathe in the damp air and listen to the thaw working everywhere at once. Soft, patient, unstoppable. The world is not warm yet. It is becoming. That is enough for tonight. Morning comes pale and quiet, with a thin mist rising where thawing snow meets the dark ground. The cabin stands behind you with smoke lifting from its chimney, no longer fierce against a storm sky, but soft, grey, and almost tired. You pause at the threshold before stepping away, listening to the last small sounds of the room, the settling fire, the tick of cooling iron, the faint movement of air through patched walls. It is a modest shelter, rough and smoky, but it has done what shelters are meant to do. It has kept a little human warmth from being taken by the cold. You gather what must travel with you: a wrapped heel of bread, a small knife, a strip of cloth, perhaps a bit of dried apple tucked away like a private luxury. In an 18th century rural household, leaving home, even for a short journey, requires thought. A mainstream historical fact rests in the act of packing. Travel in remote areas often depends on weather, daylight, road conditions, local knowledge, and the ability to carry or arrange food, tools, and protection against cold. There is no casual stepping out with the assumption that comfort will appear whenever required. Comfort has to be planned, carried, borrowed, or earned. You tie your bundle carefully. The knots matter. A loose bundle spills. A dropped tool may vanish in mud or snow. A damp cloth may freeze if the day turns. Every object seems to ask whether it is useful enough to deserve its weight. The cabin has taught you that usefulness is a kind of beauty, plain but persuasive. The chipped bowl, the patched stocking, the blackened kettle, the axe handle rubbed smooth by hands. Each one belongs to a world where things are kept alive almost as carefully as people. The fire is not abandoned thoughtlessly. You rake the coals into a safe bed, decide what may smoulder, what must be covered, what should be separated. If someone remains, the hearth continues its slow service. If the cabin is to be left empty, the fire must be made safe, because one careless ember can undo months or years of work. The hearth gives life, but it also demands respect. Even comfort has teeth. Historians still argue whether the remote cabin is best remembered as a symbol of independence, hardship, displacement, adaptation, or nostalgia. It can be all of these, and more. For some, such cabins represent survival and self-making. For others, they stand within broader histories of colonization, land-taking, migration, poverty, and forced choices. A small building can hold many truths at once. The logs do not explain themselves. People do that later, sometimes honestly, sometimes romantically, sometimes while sitting in heated rooms and calling hardship charming. You step outside. The air touches your face, cool but no longer cruel. The yard is marked with the season's evidence, chopped wood scraps, dark patches of thawing earth, animal tracks softened by melt, ashes scattered where they were carried out, slush near the doorway, a bucket ring frozen into old snow. The world looks used, lived in, worked over. Not pretty in the polished way, but full of signs that hands have answered need after need. A quirky tidbit belongs to departure and return. In some households, a latch string may be left hanging outside to signal welcome, while pulling it in can mean privacy or absence. The phrase about the latch string being out survives as a symbol of hospitality. It is a small thing, a cord through a door, but it carries a whole social grammar. Even the latch gets to have manners. Modern doorbells suddenly seem rather needy by comparison. You lift the latch, close the door, and hear it settle into place. That sound has weight. Inside remains the dim warmth, the smell of smoke, the table with its scratches, the hearthstones dark with use. Outside waits the road. If the muddy line through trees deserves such confidence, you turn from the cabin and begin to walk. The first steps are slow. The ground changes underfoot with every yard. Snow crust breaks, mud grips, ice hides in shadow. A trickle of water runs across the path, clear and cold. The trees drip steadily, each branch releasing winter one bead at a time. Sunlight catches the drops and makes them flash briefly before they fall. You notice how bright the world can seem after so many days of smoke-dark corners. The cabin grows smaller behind you, but its lessons remain close. Warmth is not simply heat, it is preparation, stored fuel, dry cloth, shared labour, careful food, watched animals, tended bodies, and stories spoken while the night leans in. It is the courage of ordinary repetition. It is knowing how to make something last one more hour. It is understanding that survival is often quiet, and that quiet things can be enormous. You pass the woodpile and see how much remains, how much has gone, how the stack records the cold better than any diary. You pass the animal shed, where a hen complains at nothing in particular, maintaining the proud tradition of poultry commentary. You pass the stream path, slick now with thaw, and remember the weight of water without needing to carry it. The place is no longer only a cabin in the trees, it is a map of tasks, each one connected to the next. Beyond the clearing, the forest receives you. Not dramatically, it simply surrounds the path again. Pine and bare branch, damp bark and old snow. A bird calls once from somewhere high. The sound is small, but it travels. Your bundle rests against your side as your breath is steady. The cold still exists, but it has lost some of its command. You look back once more, smoke lifts, thins, and disappears into the pale morning. The cabin does not ask to be admired. It only stands there, low and weathered, with its patched walls and stubborn roof. It has been workshop, kitchen, sick room, shelter, storehouse, and evening world. It has been smoky, cramped, draughty, and absolutely necessary. You carry that truth with you as the path bent away. The frost remains in shaded hollows, silver and delicate, but the sun is touching it now. Firelight belongs behind you. Morning lies ahead. Between them, you walk slowly, wrapped in wool, carrying the memory of warmth through the thinning cold. The path softens beneath your feet, and now there is no need to hurry. The cabin rests behind the trees, small and steady, its smoke fading into the pale sky like a thought becoming sleep. The forest is quiet in a gentler way now, not empty, not lonely, just calm. You breathe in, and the air is cool, damp, and clean. It moves through the pines, over the melting snow, across the dark earth waiting beneath. Each sound grows softer, the drip from a branch, the hush of your steps, the faint call of a bird far away. Nothing asks much of you here. The day opens slowly, and you're allowed to move slowly with it. The fire remains in memory, low and amber, tucked safely in the hearth. The rough walls hold their shadows. The blanket lies folded. The wooden bowl is set aside. The bucket is still. The tools are quiet. All the small labours of the long cold season settle into stillness, like dust in warm light. You do not need to carry the weight of the wood pile now. You do not need to count the candles or spend the cloth, watch the sky, or listen for the storm. For this moment, everything has been done enough. The cabin has held. The night has passed. The frost is loosening its careful grip. So you let the image grow dimmer. Smoke fades into mist. Snow fades into water. The hearth fades into a soft red glow, then into warmth without shape. You rest there, in that quiet pocket between firelight and morning, safe beneath the slow breathing of the trees, and as the last ember settles and the pale road disappears into dream, you can let your own thoughts grow lighter, softer, quieter, until there is only warmth and hush and sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.